Hey guys, I think it's time we had a longer conversation or a more in-depth conversation on toxicity in League of Legends. I wasn't expecting to make a video like this, but the subject really got, I think, pushed because in the last video I was going over some upcoming changes and we talked about how the honor system is changing in 2025 in a way that's going to prevent people who are honor level 2 from being able to use all chat in games, and is going to prevent players who are honor level 1 or honor level 0 from being able to communicate in the post-game chat, but also even in champion select. So they won't be able to communicate whether they have preferences for summoner spells, whether they need to swap roles, whether they're filled or not, communicate any information about strategy or anything like that whatsoever. I'm a player who has coached some amateur teams. I have peaked in GM and usually hover, around like mid to high masters. And I also happen to be an honor level 5 player. I said it myself in the last video. Usually I'm sitting at honor level 5, but there are periods of time where maybe once a year or twice a year, I'll get a chat restriction for 3 days because I play a lot of games in order to be this good at the game, and I take the game very, very seriously, and I'll get hit with a chat restriction. And as a result, your honor level goes all the way down from honor level 5 to honor level 0 as a result of potentially even just one bad game of toxicity, or maybe it's 2 games of toxicity in a row. And it doesn't even have to be like the worst toxicity imaginable. Of course, it's just language filter. So usually it's just a couple of swear words that were said that were picked up on by the filter. You weren't creative enough with the way that you insulted somebody in your game. And so as a result, you get hit with a chat restriction. You go back down to honor level 0. But then because generally you're a pretty non-toxic player, especially considering the average of your, the average level of toxicity for your rank, you climb slowly back up to honor level 5, and then you sit there for a while before anything happens again. I have never been permanently banned from the game or anything like that. I generally consider myself to be quite a non-toxic player. I think I've only ever been 2-week banned one time or something like that for something that I said. And that was because I hit a word filter as well. So the problem that I have is, number one, when it comes to problems with League that people need to be getting banned for and facing severe punishments for, League is first and foremost a competitive game. And in any competitive game, the most important thing is maintaining competitive integrity, not policing the words that people are using. So number one, the problem that we experience is that I think most of the people who are getting banned for chatting are getting banned for chatting in extreme examples, in extreme cases, in rare games where somebody else is like actually trolling the game extremely hard, and that person who takes the game seriously gets frustrated at that person and uses a word that is on a filter, a word list that is banned, and then that gets picked up on, and that person gets chat restricted, again, sometimes for even one game, which instantly drops their honor all the way back down to 0. I don't think that this is a good system by any means, and I actually think that toxicity to some extent in a competitive game, especially the higher rank you go, should be more acceptable and is actually fine for the game. First off, League is not a gentleman's game. League of Legends is not golf at the country club. League of Legends is a competitive video game online for young men to be competitive at. And if you ever actually played League at a high level or played any competitive sports at a high level, you'll understand that whether you're playing League or whether you're playing soccer or football or baseball, there is a certain level of aggressiveness, and the better you get at that game, the higher level team that you're on, and the more committed to the game that you are. And I think the older you get, until a breaking point. So like you wouldn't be as so toxic if you're 10, but then you get to a breaking point where, you're 18, 19, 20. It's the most toxic age, I think, for young men in general, in terms of, how competitive they are. They're just the most competitive at that point. Their testosterone levels are the highest. And then you get older and maybe you fall off a little bit once you're, getting to the 30 range or so. You even see this in certain people, like with Tyler 1, for example, being much toxic when he was younger and in college, and then mellowing out as he got older and, now has a family. So I think that the reality is that League of Legends is a game that is targeted at those kinds of people. And the kinds of people who are commenting saying that you shouldn't be able to play ranked at all if you're honor level 3 or below, these people have never been in a competitive environment in any field, frankly, in their life, and I can tell, and it shows. So normally I'm not so combative or hostile when it comes to this. And again, I'm not a toxic person, and it is a weird hill to die on, because I'm not a toxic player, and I generally don't think that it's necessary to defend toxic people. There's plenty of other areas that we could be defending, or I'd be more interested in talking actually about other aspects of the game. I'll tell you this, my YouTube channel is about taking my 10 years of experience with League and the thousands of hours that I've put into getting good at the game, and sharing that information and advice with people so that they can get better at the game, because they take the game seriously and they want to hear good advice about how to get better at the game. To people who watched the last video or who disagree with me on this topic, don't watch my other videos. They won't help you, because you don't take the game seriously enough. If you honestly think that someone shouldn't be allowed to play ranked because they got frustrated like once every 6 months and got chat restricted, not even like a big chat restriction or anything like that. We're talking about if you think somebody who got chat restricted one time should not be able to play ranked for I don't know how many games it takes, but until they play normals to build their honor back to level 3 or something like that. If you honestly think that, you don't take the game seriously enough. You're not as competitive at the game as you need to be to make any use out of the advice that I give on this channel. So if you're the type of person who really thinks that Riot should be cracking down even harder on people who are typing to their teammates in game, my advice is not going to be useful to you, because you don't take the game seriously enough, period. So let's get into the conversation about it, because there were a lot of points that were made. Some of them are pretty good, some of them are pretty weak on both sides. And I just want to go through some of the comments in the conversation and try to think about the different perspectives on this, and where Riot should land, and what we think about League in general. I'll give a little bit about my background first, because I think that it's important in this case. Not really any credentials or anything like that, but background that is specifically relevant to this. So actually something that's not really a credential is back when I was in silver and gold and first starting to get better at the game. I started in bronze, but when I was in silver, and I think in high school or something like that at the time, in the beginning of high school, I had met through a mutual friend, somebody who played League, Korean guy, at another high school. And he told me that he was part of this Korean gaming clan that had a TeamSpeak server. And basically it was just a group of 50 Korean guys, pretty much all of them living in NA. And they just played League and tried to get really good at the game and that sort of thing. And, they give each other tips and advice and play games together and that sort of thing. So they, essentially like a Discord server today. And you had to be gold to get into this group. And so he and I played until I got good enough to get to gold to even join this group. And then when I joined the group, what I found was a very interesting environment, because I was pretty new to League, but the environment was very, very toxic. And what I mean by that, but I loved it. The environment was toxic in the sense that the way that those people talked to each other when we were playing games was pure unfiltered banter. and criticism. So if you messed up in one of those games, the more experienced, higher ranked players would let you know, and they'd swear at you and they'd yell at you and they'd tell you all this stuff. And I found it really funny. But also I learned a lot from it. And during the time I was playing with that Korean group of players on the NA server, I went from being a gold player to a diamond player. So most of my experience getting better at League, which really happened in 2 parts, but my experience going from bronze to diamond happened with a group of people who were okay with being honest with each other about the way that they played the game. And not only being honest with each other, but not sugarcoating their frustration with you. If you wanted to hang with this group, if you wanted to be a player that they respected, and that, if you wanted to be a solid part of this group, you had to prove yourself through playing the game well and through being able to take criticism. And on the flip side, if you were doing well, if you were good, if you had a valid point, it goes both ways. You could criticize somebody that you're playing with and point out the mistakes that they're making. And instead of having such a scared negative reaction to the criticism, they just either banter back and forth with you or agree with you or stay quiet or whatever, and they do their thing. And we learned a lot from playing that way because we could be honest with each other about how bad we were playing the game, and so many of us got very good. This actually led to me getting into esports in the first place because a couple of the players in that group got so good that even in season, I think 4 or something like that, there were players in that group that had a ranked 5s team that had reached Challenger. And I started helping that group of players by VOD reviewing their games and spectating their games and giving them notes, which is how I got into being an analyst for League in the first place. Then I moved on from that group to working with the amateur League team. And then recently jumped to later. I had been stuck in Diamond for a while. I was kind of not playing League as much anymore as well, with starting college and focusing on that. And then later on, I got back into League when the pandemic started, and I was looking for something fun to do on the computer when classes were really easy and slow online. And I got back into League, and then I improved greatly from having been stuck in Diamond for a very long time to getting to Masters for the first time. And then I think I've made lots of improvements since getting to Masters, which has allowed me to get to GM a couple of times. So recently, about a year ago, I also started my own amateur team, which I coached, of 5 Challenger players that competed in the NACS Open Qualifier Tournament. And there's something really important about the dynamics that you would only understand if you're actually in these environments. For some reason, I guess the reason why I would say that I can tell that you guys who are like really, really, really on one side of this argument really think that there's no place for criticism or harshly worded criticism in League is because you guys, the reason why I can tell that those people have never been in a serious competitive environment before is because if you've been on a sports team, I've been on some sports team, even amateur sports teams, where our coach has completely just ratted us out, just yelled at us for the way that we were playing. Like middle school basketball, I had like a rec soccer team where we had a former Marine coaching our team who was used to coaching better soccer teams. He was used to coaching select soccer teams, which means soccer teams where people are chosen to be on. And he asked us at the start of the season whether we want to practice like he would teach his select teams, or whether we wanted to take practice more casually and maybe do it in a more fun way, maybe scrim more and stuff like that. And we said what we wanted to do was practice like his select teams, that he should coach the way that he normally does. And he was very harsh on us, and we did not do very well as a team for lots of different reasons. In a lot of cases, when you have a team like that, I don't think it was because of his coaching style. I think that the coaching style was good and we agreed to it. I think that we didn't do well because sometimes with those teams, you just have a year where you just don't have the best players, and that's just the way that it goes. I mean, a year where you're getting completely blown out of the water, usually it's more to do with the players that you have than anything else. Other years we did great. But the point is that I can tell that those people haven't been in a competitive environment before in team sports or in competitive esports, because if you don't think that getting frustrated to the point of yelling and swearing, if you don't think that that has a place in competition, then you have not participated in serious competition, period. That's just really all that there is to it at the end of the day. And I think that when you look at video games in general compared to actual sports, there's even more of a place for it online and in video games than there are in actual sports. For a lot of reasons. I mean, there's basic reasons like obviously it's more anonymous, but I think actually that when you agree to play a game like League that's known as a very toxic game, I think that you do agree to a certain extent to be okay with entering a game where you're going to be faced with level of toxicity. And if you don't like the level of toxicity that exists within League, there are many other games that you could go play. Maybe a competitive game at a high level isn't right for you. Now, as I said before, and I think this is a really important point, different levels of toxicity, I think, are appropriate at different levels of play. If you're an iron player or a bronze player or a silver player, and you're playing with a lot of people who are new to the game or who are playing the game very casually, even if it's ranked, or who don't take the game that seriously, even if you take the game seriously, there's a certain expectation and a certain average of behaviors at your rank. And the average bronze or silver player, believe it or not, is going to be much less toxic than the average diamond player or the average master player, especially when met with certain levels of play that are below expectation, because the bronze player who's just started playing ranked is not as invested into the game as someone who has sunk literal years of their life to be good at the game. And so you will run into the most, nice guys, outstanding people in high elo solo queue, in challenger and GM and in masters, who if you have a really, really bad game or really subpar, right, they are going to flame you very, very harshly. But I think that that's appropriate. And the reason why I think that it's appropriate is because when you've gotten to masters or GM or challenger, and you go into a game and you completely fail to do your job, right? You're wasting everyone's time in that game. You're not providing a quality practice environment for all the players in that game. You're not helping your teammates win. You're negatively holding a bunch of people back from achieving their goals that they put a lot of time and effort into. And you're making their game miserable and impossible to play. Bad games happen, and that's fine. For me, what you have to understand is that it goes both ways. You have to be able to accept the toxicity if you feel like you want to be able to dish it out. So this is something that's important to understand as well. If somebody were to tell me an AD carry in a solo queue game that I'm playing, where I'm going 0-10, and doing absolutely terribly, if they were to say something to me and I agree that I'm playing bad, even if they said something very harsh, even if they swore, even if they insulted me or something like that, I would usually just either not respond. Well, usually I just not respond, because I can recognize as a good player when I am having a terrible game. Most players in high elo, when they have a terrible game, deafen. Why? Because they know they're going to get flamed, because they know they deserve to get flamed, because they're playing well below the expectation for their rank. And so a lot of players, when faced with that reality, have options. This is the other thing. You have options. I play with my settings so that my chat is off. I often toggle it on to see what people are saying. if pings are flying, or I will toggle it on if I feel the need to say something. And most games, I never say anything. I probably never say anything in 90% of my games. And in 10% of my games, I'll ask if our team is doing okay mentally, in 5% or something. And in another 5%, there is someone who is ruining the game at a very high level and wasting a lot of time for people because their account is bought or boosted, or they didn't dodge when they were filled, or not just even having a bad game. It's usually rarely just because someone's having a bad game. It's because somebody else is being toxic with their gameplay, not in terms of having a bad game, but in terms of they got frustrated by an event that happened, even though the game was still winnable. And now they are like flashing and blowing their ult and standing around base and doing nothing, or like intentionally baiting you into fights and then standing around and not doing anything. Not in the low elo sense of like, oh, they just didn't see what was going on standing next to me, or like this guy baited me. I'm talking about like high elo players will literally walk like they're going to gank you and then start a fight, and then they'll just stand still so that you get baited into a committed fight and then die. We're talking about stuff like that. That is the kind of stuff that's happening. If you imagine, I ask people to imagine, in the 1% worst games that you experience, what are players doing to ruin games? Somebody is actively running it down. Somebody is completely given up and not trying. Somebody is AFK split pushing down a side lane. Somebody has typed open mid in all chat and is running around doing who knows what, or AFK pushing a side lane or starting fights and baiting people and not using their abilities. Sometimes people will run around trying to steal all their junglers' camps. Whatever the case may be, flashing in base and using your ult, selling all your items, whatever the case may be, that behavior is infinitely worse for a serious competitive game, especially at the highest level. That behavior is infinitely worse than somebody telling that person to fuck off. Infinitely worse. The other problem that I have with this whole concept in general of toxicity being such a problem is that we know how to get around the chat filters, right? We know that swear words are banned, and so we just avoid using them. So you're not actually doing anything, right? You're just punishing people because they were too lazy to get around the filter, because they wanted to use a swear word instead of saying some stupid censored word. I think one of the dumbest things is that on in a game like League, or on the internet in general now, YouTube is like this. It's filled with people self-censoring themselves. Like, you're not allowed to say kill yourself on YouTube because you'll get flagged. It's like, if you can't say what you mean, then language ceases to have proper meaning. We should probably now, at this point, because I am just ranting, we should probably jump into the comments, because I think anyone who's watching this who disagrees with me is probably going to want to hear my responses. They're already typing the same things that were said before. So we should jump into some of the criticisms of this argument that I have. But the basic principles of my argument is that free speech is really important. There's a heavy criticism to that we'll have to address, but free speech is really important. In competition, especially the higher level you go, and the more seriously you take it, the more time you've invested and put into it, the harsher you are to your teammates and to the opposition. And that involves yelling and swearing. That's just the way that it is. You can be a good person and also be and also use harsh rhetoric when you're talking to people in a game that you take seriously, because they're just not related. Like, you can be a good person and you can also take a game very competitively and very seriously and get very frustrated when your teammates react a certain way. The other thing is that, well, anyways, we'll get into it. So let's see, what are some of the criticisms of this approach? Maybe some of these we've already addressed. Let's stop denying the elephant in the room. You, the you that has honor level 0, I have honor level 5, got banned and lost your honor level for a reason. Given your own logic, I would argue that you shouldn't be allowed to play ranked unless you are honor level 3. This is where I was getting that argument from. Not allowing people to play ranked because of the way that they type in general is ridiculous. Even 2-week bans that are handed out and things like this, or forcing people to play normal games, are ridiculous in general. Why is that? Imagine if when you played soccer or football or baseball, imagine if you're on a competitive team in a competitive environment, and if you are too harsh with your teammates, if you use a swear word with your teammates on your team, you're not allowed to play for the next 2 weeks. I am aware that there are different coaching styles, and there are actually some coaches in some schools, especially again, the younger you go, that might actually implement something like this. So some people might have some experience with something like this. I think it's BS. You should not prevent someone from playing the game because they take the game seriously. Removing people who take the game seriously from ranked makes the game a joke from a competitive standpoint. Nobody prevents you from playing golf or from playing baseball if you're too toxic, especially at the highest levels. If you weren't, to at least a certain degree, fired up and frustrated about a really bad game, that would be a reason for coaches to be concerned. People have been cut from professional teams for not being upset during training camps at the way things are going. That has happened before. That is a reality. So it depends on the coaching style. Some coaches, especially the younger you go, I can see it in high school, even though high school sports sometimes can be competitive. But obviously, high schools are more focused on teaching certain values through sports rather than solely the competitive nature of it. So I can see that in high school. But I'm telling you, like if you look at some of the videos of, for example, like Hard Knocks in the NFL, there are players where a lot of coaches, depending on their coaching style, if there was something really bad happening with a team and their players weren't fired up and mad about it, wanting to fix it, wanting to talk to each other and criticize each other, a player who is apathetic to losing like that in the highest level of a competitive environment will be removed from a team for not caring enough. That's the reality of the situation. So, I think that removing people from ranked because they've gotten chat restricted, like a 3-game chat restriction for saying one swear word once every 6 months or once every year or even less frequently or however frequently or ever, right, is ridiculous. So that's to that comment. Let's see what else we got here. If you want a competitive environment, you need to ban toxicity. It shouldn't be that in a gentleman or woman's game, even competitive games, that lowbrow insults are acceptable. Completely disagree. Again, this is where I was saying we're not at a country club. This is not golf. This is a PC game. If you take away the thing that PC games have, that games like League, that games like Call of Duty have, it's incredible levels of banter and free speech to just be able to tell your teammates whatever you want, what you think. That is not the only aspect that makes the game good, but it obviously is one aspect of a competitive game like League that makes it worth playing. Let's say that you had a competitive game that was comparable to League. In fact, there is competitors to League, right? Take a game like CSGO. It's a different game. It's a shooter, but CSGO is a competitive game that's been around for a long time. In CSGO, for the most part, you can say whatever you want. It has voice chat and people are toxic in it and they say whatever they want because it's a competitive game. Now, again, the expectation is that the lower rank you are and the less seriously the people in your lobby take the game, the less level of toxicity that they're used to and that the average person in that rank expects. And so as a result, right, if you're the 1% most toxic players in the game, or the 2% most toxic players in the game, or something like that, you're going to get banned for it, and that's probably fine. But the idea that anyone who ever swears should get banned and not be able to play ranked for many, many games or something, or that League is a gentleman's game. League is not a gentleman's game. League is a game played by teenage to young men, and it is a competitive online PC game that people get good at, and especially at the highest levels that people have put a lot of time into getting good at, and they expect results from their teammates. And if their teammates fail to perform, especially, again, if they're failing to perform in either a catastrophic way or they're failing to perform in an intentional way, and at 90% of the time people are typing, it's because their teammates are intentionally failing to perform on purpose. Right? I know that this is something that is hard for low elo players to understand too. I think that when low elo players think of a toxic player, one of the reasons why they think of toxic players as being so bad is because 90% of the time the toxic player is wrong about what the other person is doing. 90% of the time that a toxic player in silver says that their teammates trolling and baiting a fight, like I talked about before, and not looking at the map. It's just that they're not looking at the map and they don't know any better. And that's to be expected in that rank. These players have just completely wrong expectations for their rank and flame anyone in a ton of their games. They're flaming like every other game. They're typing to their teammates every other game negative comments, because they don't know any better and they don't have the right expectations for their rank. We're not talking about players like that. We're talking about players who take the game seriously and lose it every once in a blue moon and use some swear words because their teammates are intentionally trolling the game, or because they're having a catastrophic failure in the way that they're playing the game. And again, most of the time, if a player is genuinely trying but having an extremely bad game, if I'm having a really bad game, I expect my team to flame me, and I'm either going to ignore it or turn chat off. It's that simple, right? Okay, so it's not a gentleman's game. It's a goddamn video game online. Let's see. People are innovative, and there will always be a way to say Caitlyn headshot IRL if you want to be toxic. Riot restricting chat so that people are forced to be literate to be offended or offend is ideal, because then those who can only express their frustrations through telling someone to bait is reasonable. This doesn't make sense to me. If you can tell somebody to Caitlyn headshot IRL, that's the same thing as telling that person to kill themselves, and everybody knows it. So you're just policing language in a way that doesn't do anything because you don't like people criticizing you for playing the game poorly. Well, guess what? When you get to a higher and higher level, the expectation goes up. That is part of competition. Any sport, any video game that's competitive, that's serious at all, the higher level you get to, the higher the expectations. And if you fail to meet those expectations catastrophically, or if you're intentionally underperforming, see, this is something people don't even really experience much in sports. Very, very rarely in competitive sports, in a soccer or baseball or football or something like that, especially like at higher levels, would you imagine a player intentionally trolling because they're frustrated with their team? Doesn't happen. So you have to understand that League has a unique problem compared to those sports in that people will troll in League in a way that they won't in those sports that are competitive. So the response, the toxicity you're going to have towards your teammates in a game like League is going to be more severe, even if your average good League player was as toxic as your average good soccer player, but you have the behavioral problems with some players that are different in League to soccer, they're way worse, because a soccer player would never intentionally troll his team just because he's frustrated or something that some play went wrong. He's never going to start intentionally trolling his team and like passing the ball to the enemy team and stuff like that and start trying to troll because he wants to lose the game. They don't do that. You have master GM challenger players who will get frustrated because of the way one play went, and they will pass the ball to the enemy team try to score on their own goal. This behavior isn't prevalent in real sports, in real competitive sports, probably because they're more serious. And so as a result, league players who take the game as seriously as those soccer players were are going to be more toxic in response to because the level of behavior is completely different and way off what's happening in a game like that. Part of the problem with that is that league is a solo queue game. It's a pickup game where you don't have a coach. If you had a coach that would take that person, if you had an environment where you had a coach, that coach would take the player who's intentionally trying to lose and yell at them and swear at them the same way that the toxic league player would. If a soccer player were to troll like that, they wouldn't even have to flame their teammate. They could if they wanted to, but they wouldn't even have to flame them because the coach would fire them, the team would kick them off of the team, and the coach would do it for them, right? The coach would get mad at that player for them. And that happens if a player is underperforming as well. If a player is underperforming at a high level in a real competitive sport, the coach is going to swear at that person, yell at that person, and have a conversation with that person about what's going on. Now, there are different people who react differently to different things. Like I said, part of the reason for my belief is because I'm a person who benefits from toxic criticism. I am used to an environment where people take the game seriously and are competitive, and I would prefer an environment where people take the game seriously and are competitive and care enough about winning the game that if I'm playing poorly, they're going to tell me, even if it's in a harsh way. That's fine with me. Other players, sometimes players aren't motivated by those kind of negative emotions. You have to know your teammates. So if you're in a team sport, you might know that most players on your team, 90% of them, would be motivated by their coach yelling at them. But the coach might know that, these couple of players don't get motivated by me doing that. It really brings them down. I'm going to have a different conversation with those players than I'm going to have with other players. So the problem is that the level of behavior in League of Legends is completely different to the level of behavior and trolling that you see in a competitive sport. So not only is it not meant to be a gentleman's game anyways, League was never going to have, and competitive online games are never going to have the same level of sophistication and rules and gentlemanly behavior that you're going to see at the country club. Not only is that ridiculous, but the level of behavior is so out of line in League that it's only natural that people who take the game seriously and competitively at a high level are going to respond verbally or with typing in this case more aggressively than you would see somebody say something in a competitive sport. So let's see what else there is. It will make your higher elo games better because it will be less toxic. High elo games are not better because they're less toxic. They're better because less people are trolling. And when you cut with a talkative, competitive group that's positive, you almost always win because mental is so important in this game. So this is something that's important to address too, because this is actually a good point. Are you more likely to win with a group of positive players or a group of toxic players? The answer is that in the short term or in that individual match, you are much more likely to win if nobody's being toxic. But in the long run, the group of people who are toxic will improve a lot more than the group of people who are not toxic. Why is this? It's because in an individual game, when you're playing, if you feel really bad, you're going to play worse as a result. If you're distracted by criticizing your teammates' mistakes, you're going to play worse as a result. And if they're distracted by responding to you, defending themselves, or typing at all in general, they're going to play worse. So in an individual match, in the middle of a game, is it a good idea to be toxic? Absolutely not. It will much more often than not result in you losing the game. This is why I usually just play with the chat off. But will a group of friends who are trying to play the game as a team of 5, who never flame each other at all, who don't take the game that seriously, they just never point out each other's mistakes, never flame each other, never get really angry about the way that the game's being played, they are going to have less confrontation, which is going to result in less growth for them because they're not being honest with themselves about the way that the game is being played. They're just coping or forgetting about it and moving on. They're, forgive and forget. The problem with that is that in the long run, if a team is not run by at least a couple of players who are pushing people to be self-critical, you're not going to get better at the game. And I'm aware that, of course, we should have the conversation about the difference between criticism and just straight up being toxic. So there is a big difference between, telling somebody like, you should have done X, Y, and Z, instead of telling somebody like, you're a degenerate. But part of the problem and the nuance is that they're often combined. So one of the things you have to understand, especially about high elo toxicity, is that high elo toxicity usually comes from a correct place and is often mixed in with factual information about the game. So for example, if you look at a really toxic player like Tarzan, right? Tarzan is often insulting people and calling them names and things like that and swearing and getting chat restricted and things like that. But to say that he's not basing those insults or criticism based on something that the player he's playing with already understands about the way that he thinks the play happened or unfolded would be ridiculous. And on top of that, sometimes toxic players, and it depends on the toxic player. There's a range of toxic players, as I said. But sometimes people who are being toxic in game are mixing the two. They're swearing, they're insulting, but they're also saying what part of the game they had a problem with and pointing out specifics that you could do to improve. For me, because I only care about improving because I take the game very seriously and competitively, I don't mind if somebody swears, and I don't mind if somebody is rude or toxic, as long as I agree with the feedback that they're providing about the gameplay. So basically in my book, or I understand what their point was and I agree with it because I know I played the situation really bad, or I know I play really bad in that game in general, I'm just going to agree with the point. And just because they swear doesn't change my my wanting to know, and confirm that I should have done something differently. It's actually negative reinforcement, but it's negative reinforcement that actually causes you to become a better player. Now, there's a healthy balance between the two, and that's important. But I think that failing to see that there can be a mix of both is also a problem. Could there be more determinations and penalties? Absolutely. Maybe losing only 1 or 2 honor levels may be more appropriate. Yeah, of course we agree on this point. Or just checking by the amount of reports. But as someone who's playing, you want your report of a player to mean something so that something gets done about it. Weeding out simple issues like people who can't mind their manners when they play is a good thing. Let those accounts get 0 honor if they lose out on rewards and end of the season and lose out on rewards at the end of the year. Good, maybe they'll reconsider their decisions. I'm surprised by your position on this, considering how much your recent videos have focused on the health of the online community. It's definitely not perfect. I agree with having a 3-strike system or something better than 0 or 5, but I think overall, if these restrictions start to suffocate the toxicity in the community, it will allow for more of the healthier and competitive and even cooperative gaming environment when queuing. Maybe I'm a little hopeful. I recognize I'm hard stuck Iron 4 with 1,000 ranked games, plus in the lost token category, so my opinion may be a little bit if we want to be getting new people into the game more often. If we want to keep people returning more often, if we want a healthier, more competitive Rift, honor restrictions and chat restrictions are the way to do it. It'll help mitigate tilt, which, yes, occurs all of the time because of poor plays, but also because of what's said in chat. So, again, it's pretty obvious to me that most of the people who disagree with me on this are low elo players who expect a lower level of toxicity and are just surprised that anyone would ever defend anyone being toxic. If you have put in a ton of time and take the game very, very seriously, and somebody who is a much, much better player, and you've played with that person before, and that person is intentionally trolling and running around the base, flashing and wasting their ult, or they're just AFK farming, or they're split pushing down a side lane and dying over and over again, or they're spamming FF and not trying to play the game and not engaging in any plays that are happening. Like, these things happen, and then people respond to them by typing. So really what we have to distinguish here is that there's two types of people typing in League. There's two types of toxicity. The people who are typing very rarely when somebody's legitimately trolling like a 1% game, like a 1% bad game where somebody's trolling, or you have people who are typing every single time one of their teammates is doing slightly bad, or anytime a bad play happens, they're typing. Those players who are consistently playing worse and distracting their team because of their constant negativity and typing, I totally agree that those players should be face some sort of punishment and restriction. But the players who are like me, who are generally honor level 5 players who play the game a lot and take it very seriously, generally pretty nice people, those players calling out somebody in a 1 in 100 or a 1 in 1,000 level game of somebody trolling, of somebody running around mid, or like refusing to play the game, or like, you know, griefing and taking somebody's position or something like that, to not be able to swear at that person in Masters Plus, I think is bad. I think Riot should allow players in Masters Plus, obviously not certain things, like you don't want to allow like racial remarks or any, you know, I can agree with like not telling people to kill themselves and that sort of thing. But to not even be able to like call the guy like a fucking idiot or something like that when you're in Masters Plus and everyone who's there has dedicated years to get there and takes the game very, very seriously. If you can't call the worst troll you get in 1,000 games a fucking idiot, then in an online PC game for young men at the highest levels of competition, then I think that the game is over censored. And if saying that one time drops you all the way from honor level 5 to honor level 0, and people think that you shouldn't even be able to play the game, let alone type to your chat and champion select when you actually need to communicate things, if you think that that's the punishment, you're just completely out of it. And what's going to happen again is League is going to, and Riot's already, you know, like such a woke company like this, they're going to continue to tighten the reins on what's allowed to be said in League. And eventually, maybe it's a small issue, so maybe I'm exaggerating this part of blowing it out of the water, but I do think if, you know, League took away the chat or something like that, something really drastic. If League took away the chat completely or something like that, I bet you that a lot of people would quit League and switch to other games where they are allowed to, you know, say what they think and be honest with their teammates and interact with people and their teammates. Because if you can't do that, I mean, what's the point, really? Okay, so what else do we got here? You're part of the reason this game is heralded as the most toxic game ever. Yes, but as I've said before, I am not, like, you have to ask yourself the question, because I think this video and the last one will come across as me being a toxic player, because why would you defend toxic players if you're not a toxic player? It's a hard mentality for people to understand. Or maybe I am a toxic player compared to what you expect in your silver games, but I'm not a toxic player compared to the average master player, not by any means. So the question is like, should the game be toxic at a high level? I think the answer is yes. If it wasn't toxic at a high level, there would be no such thing as high level. People wouldn't be taking the game seriously. It wouldn't be that competitive. It's that simple. If you have competition, you will have toxicity. They're one and the same. And again, this is a really important point. If you want to bring down the level of toxicity to, to be less. Like, let's think of games and how toxic they are. So let's say we have League of Legends up here, and then we have football, and then we have golf, right? Why is League of Legends up here and then football down here in the middle and then golf way down here? The reason for that is because League of Legends is frustrating because it's a team game and because it's a pickup style game, even at the highest competitive level, unless you're literally playing in the LCS or something. And so people get very, very frustrated at the highest level of play. And so they do the equivalent of like yelling and swearing at each other. Now, people also yell and swear at each other in football, but probably not to the same extent as they do in League of Legends. Why? It's because in football, they're, for one thing, they're on a team with the same players over and over again, and so as a result, their teammates are never trying to lose. They may play poorly, and so there are going to be those few times where maybe someone's playing so poorly that they get flamed, or that it's acceptable to flame them because of how much they're playing below the level of expectation. People think that their account's bought or something like that. It's the same thing with football. Nobody's ever intentionally trying to lose the game, so the level of toxicity is lower because nobody ever has to elevate their toxicity in football to the level of League of Legends because none of their teams are ever trying to run it down. Okay, so then you go to a game like golf. Well, golf is no longer a team game, and so there's really nothing to be mad about. Like, there's no teammates to flame, so there's not really any opportunity for toxicity. So I hope I've clarified with that why some games are more toxic than others. League of Legends is more toxic because your teammates are able to troll and do troll more than they would in any other competitive game or sport. That's why there's more toxicity. If you're really serious about getting rid of toxicity in League of Legends at all elos, but especially in high elos, what you would do is you would have better detection and you would have people monitoring and when people are trolling games, and those people would be punished severely, and people who are calling those people out would be chat restricted less severely or lose less honor as a result. There needs to be a difference and a distinguishing between players who are being toxic like every other game in chat and players who are being toxic every once in a while to someone who is truly a 1 in 200, a 1 in 300, a 1 in 1,000 troll in their game, at the highest levels of play. Okay. Discussions can be productive until you start saying things that are ban-worthy. I don't agree with that at all. You can have a productive conversation and use things that are ban-worthy. Like, if I use swearing like shit and fuck, if I use those words, right, you can still have a productive conversation while that language is being used in-game. If you're okay with that type of language being used in game. I understand that silver players are not okay with that kind of language being used all the time in their games. They didn't sign up for that necessarily. And, it's just silver solo queue. It's not the end of the world, right? People are starting out. People are learning the game. But when you are playing with everybody who's a, multi-year veteran players who have gotten to the top of the leaderboards, the expectation is very different. That's all that there is to it. And until you're there, either in league or in a sport or something like that, you just won't understand what I'm talking about. Truthfully, I think it might be better to just have visible honor levels in game, so I could pre-mute you. I actually don't have a problem with this. I think it's really weird that they have the whole honor system and I can't go and see what people on my friends list honor is. I think that that's weird. I think you should be able to publicly see what people's honor level is. I think that that's totally fine. So that you could pre-mute them before they say something that will tilt them for the rest of the game. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, like I said, I play with the chat off. It might be interesting because it would make it easier if there was even a feature where you could select the honor level that you're okay with communicating with. So, for example, you could select in settings that like you want to pre-mute chat from everyone who's honor level 0, or you could select I want to pre-mute chat for everyone who's honor level 1 or below, or 2 or below, or 3 or below, or 4 or below. And then that way you could kind of almost in a way, not that the honor system is perfect, because again, you'll have people who are pretty honorable players actually who are climbing back up through the honor ranks, and you'll have really toxic people are probably constantly at the bottom. But not that the honor system is perfect, but you'd almost, to some extent, you'd have the ability to control how toxic your chat is. And I think that that would be good. For me, I play with chat off, actually, so that's the most restricted of all. But the reason why I play with chat off is because I know that people are going to flame me sometimes for the way that I'm playing the game. And I don't want to see it because it's going to affect the way that I'm going to do in that individual game, and I want to win the game. But I don't necessarily mind that they're doing it if I know that I'm playing really bad. And everyone has bad games. People like to deny it, but I have some absolutely atrocious games. I have teammates with absolutely atrocious games. And most of the time, I don't think it's worth flaming people for having a bad game, right? But I do think it's worth flaming people when they're intentionally trolling. And I think if somebody's having a really catastrophic game, if somebody is really, really having a catastrophic game, it's not good to flame them, but I don't think that you should get banned by any means. I don't think you should get chat restricted it depends on the level, right? It's all nuanced, but I really don't think that you should be getting your honor dropped from, like, let's say honor level 5 to honor level 0 because you tell somebody who's like completely entered the whole game away, 1v9, they've 1v9 for the enemy team. Like, if you can't say anything like to that person, or you can't make it clear how much they've wasted everybody's time and how much they've performed below expectations and stuff like that. If you can't flame that person even a little bit at the highest level of play, I think that the game is just too dumbed down, frankly, and restricted. If players lose more because they can't communicate in champion select, maybe they'll learn self-control or quit. That's sort of a good point, because actually the player who would be the most affected by the negative aspect of not being able to type in champion select in a way that was effective would be that person, although it does affect some innocent people along the way. Really the only thing that I really disagree with about the last change, you can get rid of them using team chat in game, and I think you can get rid of them using all chat in game, and I think you can get rid of them being able to use post lobby. But I really think that, because you need to be able to swap roles sometimes, I really do think that not being able to type in champion select seems like just a obviously bad change. I'm surprised so many people agree with it. You talk about communication in champion select. Oh, I'm autofilled. Can we swap? But one, even if you swap, you're autofilling someone else basically, unless the stars align, and it would put you both in your main roles. So a couple of things. One, this is probably another discrepancy between most of the people who watch and listen and high elo. In high elo, most of the time, people can either play multiple roles, or there's so much autofilling going on in high elo that it actually does happen where the stars align way more often than you would think, and somebody can actually play the other role. The other thing is that you're assuming that both players are going to play the autofilled role equally well, whereas the reality is that somebody might play that role as their secondary role, and by swapping around, you might mitigate how bad they actually are. So I completely disagree with that. The other thing is that, this is point number 2, you said you'd be giving the team information so that they can dodge, but then say you usually dodge yourself if you're autofilled, so that's not going to change, is it? If you're already dodging when you're autofilled, then keep dodging when you're autofilled. The changes to the honor system will most likely be the best thing League has done to combat toxicity, although, anyway, so the second point I thought was going to be, if you're not dodging when somebody else is filled and they say something, like mid pref or top pref or 80 carry pref or something like that. Sometimes I do, actually. Sometimes I do that, and sometimes other high elo players will do that. There is just undeniably a higher percentage chance that the game will get dodged if somebody says that they prefer another role and that they're filled, especially if the trade doesn't happen, because It's less likely to get dodged if the trade happens, because there is an expectation that if you agreed to the trade, that the other person is somewhat capable of playing the role, or thinks that they're much more capable of playing the role than the person asking to swap. So, the games are dodged sometimes, either by that person or by somebody else. And like I said, I almost always dodge when I'm autofilled. I'm actually very proud of the fact I just saw this. This split, I have dodged every time I've not been support, which I think has been really good for my ranked climb. And I'm, that's good, because it means I haven't been trolling my teammates by getting a couple of games in on mid. But the reality is that especially the more games you play, the reality is that sometimes you just don't end up dodging for various reasons when you get put in a secondary role or filled. Why is that? For one, you can literally just mess it up. Like, people really try to game the timing, and I'm very good at it, because I have a lot of experience dodging as a high elo player. But you can mess up the timing and end up getting into game. It totally happens, right? The other thing is that sometimes you can just think that you've got a good enough matchup and you're confident enough in your team or your team comp or something like that you just let the game go through. Sometimes you're not paying good enough attention, etc., and the game goes through. So even though I normally dodge when I'm autofilled, it doesn't mean I'm always going to dodge when I'm autofilled. And even if there's just a chance that somebody else on my team dodges because they know I'm autofilled, that's better for our team and for the lobbies in general, than to let these autofilled games go through. Another problem, here is, let's say that you actually just want to get rid of, the root problem here, similar to how the root problem with the toxicity is mostly people trolling and then those people getting flamed. I think that the root problem here is that there's too many people getting autofilled, especially in high elo. And so if people weren't getting autofilled all the time in high elo, I don't think I would complain so much, because if it was a rare occasion that people were communicating that in the chat in Champion Select, then I wouldn't think it's such a big deal. But it's a big deal. And as I said, also, you have to keep in mind that it's just the reality that the level of toxicity that's expected is higher in high elo and lower in low elo, yet we're working with the same chat filter in ranked. So when a high elo, GM player says the same comment to somebody, they're just as likely to get banned as a silver player saying that comment to somebody, when the behavior would be abhorrent in silver and is pretty typical in GM. And I think that that's actually a huge problem. So if you fixed the amount of autofills in high elo, which is an issue we've talked about before, I do not think that Master Plus lobbies should be a 3-minute queue, the same as silver. I think that Master Plus lobbies should be around 10 minutes. It shouldn't be like it was back in the old days when it was a 30-minute queue. That's a waste of everybody's time. But I think high elo players are definitely willing to wait, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 9 minutes in order to really decrease the number of autofills, instead of having to deal with so many autofilled players. And then, as far as the rest of the typing goes in Champion Select, people come into Champion Select and type some negative stuff from the previous game, or flame, or question whether somebody on their team is from the previous game or something like that. That kind of thing, is a problem. And I think, well, actually, here's another hot take on that. When people come into Champion Select in high elo flaming each other from the last game and checking if this person is in the lobby, and then they end up being in the lobby on the same team and they say that they're going to troll, those games almost always get dodged. And so if those people aren't able to type like that and identify to the rest of the team that that's what's going on, we have to play those games out where somebody is trying to get into a game with somebody they're upset with from the last game and run them down again. So this is another issue with that. I was with you until you started talking like an incel about honor level chat restrictions. I mean, this comment's just beyond bizarre. I mean, you do have a few. Like, you have this, like, in a game where every second word triggers the ban system, maybe game design is the problem and not the players. With every day, this game is becoming more and more like slot machine pulling. I mean, that's true. I hear your points about potentially getting unlucky with your frustration in one game, leading to rewards. But at the end of the day, you sort of just signaled that you should have the right to use insults occasionally if the game is getting to you. Yes, exactly. It has so much to do with the frequency and the elo that you're at. If you're very high elo and you're very occasionally, like we're talking about once a month, really going hard on somebody or something like that, you have to imagine that depending on the number of games that you're playing, if once a month or once every 6 months or once a year or something like that, if that's how often you're going at somebody, like, again, you have these different levers. Like, how hard are you going on the person? How bad is the language that you're using? What elo are you at? And how competitive is that elo? Again, the higher up you go, the more toxic you should be allowed to be. And the lower elo you are, the less expectation that you're toxic, because people are playing the game more casually. That's just the way that it is, obviously. And yet the honor system and the chat restrictions and bans don't take any of this into account. There's no expectation. So maybe you design the system where right now we have an average level of like chat restrictions. Maybe you design it so that there's less chat restrictions in high elo, where people are obviously going to take the game more seriously and more competitively. And then in silver, where you guys are demanding more, maybe the answer is just that in lower elos, the chat restrictions and the ban should be harsher. Maybe that's the way that it should work. Riot certainly has the capability to do that, because it's already based on like frequency of reports and like total number of reports, and things like that. And so if they just lowered the threshold depending on the rank that you're at, then that would, cut out a lot of the problem. But yes, occasionally you should be able to insult somebody in high elo if they're playing the game poorly. Otherwise, it's not a competitive game. And again, not just if they're playing the game poorly, but a lot of times if they're trolling. If the game is getting to you, or that you can't control yourself in the worst moments and need to use language that can be flagged if you're frustrated enough. Back when I was the most addicted to League in my life, playing like 16 ranked games a day, I would argue and get pissed at a teammate in almost every single game, but I never got chat banned once. Really, the only difference between me and someone who got chat banned is that I never saw the need to pure vent rage in the form of insults and slurs. And this is exactly my point. This player typing this, criticizing me for defending toxicity, is more toxic than I've ever been in this game. I am not the type of person who flames somebody every other game. In fact, like I said, 90% of my games plus, I'm not typing at all because I play with chat off on party only mode. This is a person who is actually getting into arguments with their teammates every other game when they were playing the game a lot and addicted to it. And they weren't getting banned just because they didn't feel the need to use swear words. Somebody who has a different approach and likes using swear words, or feels the need to use swear words for emphasis because somebody is trolling and ruining their game, and you're going to want to use more emphasis the higher rank and the more serious you are about the game. Those people who are using those words that are filtered or whatever are going to get restricted, while someone like this who's genuinely toxic is just not going to. We talk about like people adapting to the change by, because they can't type in champion select. People have already just adapted to not get banned. In fact, the people who are getting caught by these chat filters are people who are not toxic every day. Because if you're toxic every day, you would be banned if you were using all the filtered words. So the people who are genuinely toxic are the people who just remember and instinctively get around the filter by using creative language in order to insult people. Whereas it's actually the people who don't think strategically about how to flame their teammates who are getting chat restricted and losing all their honor for no reason. So if you can't enforce the penalties in a fair way across the board, where people who are genuinely being toxic every other day are getting punished, and people who are only being toxic once every 6 months or something like that in a severe sort of way, if that's the way that your system works, then it's not a very good system in the first place. And that's the problem. You could easily point out weak links, inters, and morons and vent on them without being genuinely toxic. It's honestly just laziness to do otherwise, which is the point. Why are you banning people and chat restricting people for being lazy or wanting to be more, basically just wanting to use certain words? It's just censorship, and it has nothing to do with actually policing the game. It's not like a genuinely toxic person cares if you're insulting them anyways. I don't know that that's true either. Like, I actually think that it's a sign of non-toxicity to admit when you're actually playing poorly and to just take the criticism without wanting to respond or just turning chat off or deafening. I think that that is a sign of maturity. The idea that only toxic people are okay with other people being toxic to them, I don't think is entirely true. This reminds me of another point I wanted to bring up, though, which is kind of like, it's, being toxic to people is a bit like bullying. And that's a whole nother can of worms. But I think that you should be able to defend yourself from bullies. And I think that it's healthy to defend yourself from bullies. So when someone is bullying you unfairly, I think that it is important, very important psychologically, for you to be able to defend yourself to the fullest and to tell that person whatever you want or whatever you need to tell that person to defend yourself when you feel like you're being attacked in front of other people in a way that's completely unfair. I think that it's very important. So I'm a very headstrong, confrontational person. And so if someone were to say something to me that's really rude and unfair, I'm going to confront that person instead of muting them most of the time. And so, which is one of the reasons why, like I said, I play with chat off, because I would get into more arguments where I'm defending myself or responding to someone else, but I'm very unlikely to type first, if that makes sense. So this is another type of toxicity, is somebody else types first and then you type in response. And I think that this defending yourself when the other person starts something first, I think is fine. It should be fine, because it's healthy for you to stand up for yourself and defend yourself when somebody is insulting you and criticizing you heavily in front of your teammates. I think that it's important for you to be able to do that, especially in high elo, where you have like a reputation and you'll play with the same people over and over again. And if maybe I should stop playing with chat unmuted, because obviously people would say things about the way that I play the game and they're just going unchecked because I don't type, because I have chat off and I'm not seeing it. But, even just that thought bothers me, which is a lot of times why, if people are spam pinging me or something like that, that's when I will unmute the chat to see what's going on. And at that point, if I feel like someone is really personally attacking me or, attacking me for the way that I played the game in a way that's not fair, I'm going to defend myself from that person. And I think that it's healthy and natural to use all of the words and tools at your disposal to defend yourself. I think it's unhealthy to force people to be scared to stand up to bullies and defend themselves because they're scared of getting chat restricted or banned. Whereas the genuinely toxic players don't care whether they get chat restricted or banned. They're used to it, or they just type around the filter because they're used to being toxic first all the time. So this is really important. I think people who are is it good that they're typing and getting distracted in the game? No. Is it good that they're being toxic as well? No. But there is obviously a difference between somebody who's constantly initiating every game or every other game and somebody who's responding and defending themselves. Huge difference there, again, not taking account in the system at all. This person said, everything you just said perpetuates the problem. If an average player can drag down the experience of others, then that's a problem, not a feature to be encouraged. that we have a reasonable comment, free speech. Okay, so this is a huge argument as well. Free speech seems kind of basic, yet here we are. And then somebody replied, free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences, though. People can say what they want, but Riot has the freedom or the right to not let them use chat or get rewards. So this is a very good point, and it definitely needs addressed. So this is the argument that you have free speech, but you don't have freedom from consequences. Because I'm a very political person, without trying to get too much into politics on this one. Free speech was designed so that people could say what they want, mostly free from consequences, because at the time, the only entity that was big enough and powerful enough to censor people and to prevent them from saying what they thought was the government. There weren't crazy mega corporations that could stop people from saying what they wanted. There wasn't the internet where people needed to use companies in order to communicate with each other. People were communicating with each other just by speaking or by writing to each other, usually letters through the post office, right? So the government controlled the post office. They controlled what people could control what people wrote, and they could control what people said to each other if they changed the law. The government was the only organization that could do that. So free speech was written under the impression that the government was the only threat to it. Obviously, today as a society, free speech is hugely diminished because of the fact that we're communicating through companies, through social media, in a game like League that's controlled by Riot, rather than, for example, if you're playing soccer or something, there's not really much controlling free speech. Sometimes if you're in an organized league, there's, of course, going to be some rules and restrictions and things like that. If you're being too toxic, of course, you could get penalized in the game and things like that. But for the most part, the problem with this concept is that when the consequences of using your speech are drastic, people aren't going to use it at all. And that's the same as if the government had come in and prevented you from using free speech. So while it's true that free speech, by the letter of the law, the way it's written in the Constitution, only prevents the government from abridging free speech, that doesn't mean that that's good, or that that's what the founders intended, or that that's healthy in any way whatsoever. In fact, free speech in general, where you don't get fired for what you say, where you don't get banned from a game that you've put years into because of what you say to your teammates, is important, because communication between people, even if it's harsh, or even if it's something that people is really controversial, or really something that people disagree with or don't want to hear, communication is key. Communication is important and the foundation on the way that all of this works. In League, for example, communication, if you can't do it properly, like if Riot removed the chat, there would be a lot of elements, even for solo queue, where team play would be removed, and your ability to even enjoy the game with other people would just be gone, because you have no good way to actually communicate or interact with other people. There are games that have done this. Hearthstone was like this, although it's a little bit less of a problem in a game like Hearthstone because it's a single player game. You're not needing to communicate with your teammates. But I always found it weird that I couldn't type to my opponent in a ranked game in Hearthstone, especially coming from League. Also, right, if one game does this, but another game is pro free speech and allows people to say whatever they want in a competitive game where people really want to be able to type to their teammates for actual competitive and communication reasons, but also to express how they feel about the game and to express satisfaction, happiness, joy, disappointment. If you can't interact with your teammates in certain ways, people will eventually go to a game where you can. Especially combined with some of the other issues League faces and that sort of thing. So this is a problem. So does free speech mean freedom from consequences? No, but we should be clear that just because the current legal status, you have a legal argument and you have a moral argument. Just because the current legal situation is that companies can regulate free speech on their platforms does not mean that it is morally good or that it is a good idea to not allow people to express themselves, to stand up to bullies, to flame people for trolling or inting their games. Because when people flame people for trolling or inting their games and give them a hard time about it, they make that person's experience worse because they're doing something bad. If somebody can just be super toxic in the way that they play the game and troll everybody and nobody calls them out for it and everyone just moves on, their behavior can become emboldened or, like, oh, nothing happened, it's totally fine, it's acceptable. This is actually worse than allowing people to say some bad words every once in a while. So while freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences, I think that free speech in general should have less consequences than it does now. The way that it was designed and thinking about whether it's a good or a bad thing from a moral perspective, it is good if people can communicate more freely with each other. That's just true. If you don't believe that, you are an authoritarian who, you can ask this question too. Why is it okay for a social media platform or a game company like Riot? Why is it okay for them to police your speech, but not okay for the government to police your speech? And I don't mean the legal argument like, well, they're a private company and the government's not allowed to do it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, First Amendment doesn't apply to them, or they get their own First Amendment rights too. What I'm talking about is from a moral perspective. What difference does it make whether, China and Riot is censoring your free speech or the government censoring your free speech? What difference does it really make? That's the problem. 100%. There is no difference, right? It's that the government was regulated that way through the Constitution because the government was the only entity at the time that could do that. They didn't foresee the internet when they were writing the Constitution, so it didn't include, or they didn't feel the need to include, and so they didn't wrestle with the very complicated problem of, well, what do we do when we have like Riot and their freedom to express themselves and control their own game, or whatever, their own platform versus some other place or company, versus a government. The other thing is that there's a difference between also a platform and a publisher, and this is really important. Not saying that this really applies to a game like League necessarily, but at least for social media, this is a huge part of the argument right now, is that if you are selective about what you allow to stay on your platform, then you're not really a platform anymore, you're a publisher. Like, you're selectively exercising editorial control over what's allowed to stay on your platform and what's not. So for example, when YouTube removes lots of videos about certain topics, or when Facebook or Twitter at the time banned certain stories from being shared, they're no longer acting as a platform where anyone can say what they want. They're acting as a publisher. And in the US, distinguishing it like that is very important because it means that them acting as a publisher, not as a platform, takes away certain legal protections that they would have from getting sued. And so this is also a very important argument that's going on with that anyways, but we don't need to get into that. Bro, nothing personal, but you did a 2-hour video trying to defend being toxic. Well, I actually only spent about 20 minutes in that video defending being toxic and talking about this change to the honor system. I probably should have included that more controversial part at the end so that more people got through the rest of the video or whatever. I'll keep that in mind for next time. But of course, now that this person has commented this, now I am actually making a 2-hour video defending toxicity. So hopefully you understand. So he's right about that. 2-hour video on defending toxicity. You're welcome. Just don't type and go to the next game. Well, it depends on the circumstances. Don't call your jungler an idiot. If you have to comment, make it constructive. I think calling your jungler an idiot's fine. You could say my jungler, and again, there's nuance. Make it constructive. Why not both? My jungler is an idiot. He should have ganked us when our wave was crashing into turret, and instead we got tower dove and lost 2 minion waves because he was too busy staying on Krugs on lock screen instead of walking to bot lane turret that he's right next to, right? My jungler is an idiot. Why is that more okay? And then this is something that you have to understand as well. I was talking about this when I was talking about Tarzan, right? That's too many words. If I just type, this is part of the reason why people use insults instead of typing a paragraph about why the person could have played the situation better. Sometimes people will give some context, but it's too much to type, right? So if Tarzan says, my mid laner is an idiot, and some play has just unfolded over the last 30 seconds, high elo players and all the players in that game know what Tarzan is talking about. When he types, my mid laner is an idiot, most people know what he's talking about because they saw the same mistake. So when a high elo player, like if I just said after, let's say we got 2 or 3 waves crashing on a spot, we're under our turret and our jungler's on Krugs right next to us, and their jungler and mid laner are coming or whatever, and they dive us and kill us while our jungler's right there because he didn't want to get off Krugs and help us. Yeah, he's right there, right? This is the type of play that would be unacceptable in the elo I play in. So let's say that guy does that. Am I going to type what I just said before? My jungler is an idiot. You were right next to us at Krugs. You should have come defended us from this tower dive. We had 3 waves crashing in. Look at all the golden XP that we missed because of this. How could you have stayed on Krugs instead of getting off it halfway through when such an important play was going on? Am I going to type that? No, everyone already knows that situation happened. Everyone already knows what the mistake was and that's the case. You just say, my jungler is an idiot. And people think, well, what was our jungler doing that during that play? Oh, he was farming his Krugs and finishing his Krugs instead of moving to the dive that was going on, right? It's implied. The criticism, if you're good at the game, it's implied when someone calls you an idiot. You already know what they're talking about. The only reason why you wouldn't know what they're talking about when someone insults you is because you're so bad at the game, you don't even think you've made a mistake, right? So it's, again, low elo players don't even understand the context in which they're getting flamed for. Or, again, genuinely toxic players who are way too toxic for low elo are calling people out, and it's genuinely confusing what they're getting called out for. And I understand that. I've had that too, where I had a game the other day where we had like a Talia jungle or something like that. We were actually winning bot lane, doing really well, having a good time, and I guess he was upset that I hadn't warded somewhere in his jungle and swept this ward in his jungle or something like that. And so he came bot lane and then flash ulted in place in a game that was 10-10 or something, and we were hard winning bot lane. He did this and then just trolled, and then we lost the game in over nothing, right? And so when he started pinging, I was genuinely confused what he was upset with me about. And so I had to turn on chat to see what he was upset with me about. Yes, that happens. But the vast majority of time, especially the higher rank you go and the more about the game you understand, when someone calls you an idiot, you know why they just called you an idiot. It's for whatever just happened, right? So you think about what just happened and why they might think that your play was so bad. And then you think, oh, was that play really bad, or was it not? Or was it not? Is this person delusional, or are they right about the way that I played that situation? And most of the time, if you're really pissing off there are some just really toxic players that get kind of pissed off for no reason or for a very minor mistake or something like that. But most of the time, if you think about it, even if it was a minor mistake, you think to yourself, okay, I understand. I shouldn't make that mistake. There's a very toxic wall in D2 and D1 that you'll run into. Hopefully, if you ever get good. Most of these people who disagree with me won't. But if you run into this very toxic wall in D1 or D2, where especially in like bot lane, you get there for the first time and you're not that good, right? You just gotten there for the first time. The games feel really hard because you're at, your all-time peak, new level. You're trying to absorb this new level of game that you're playing at, right? And you get there, and I experienced this a lot. You make one minor mistake in lane, your AD carry will just run you down. Like your AD carry loses all confidence and faith in you as a support. And, one little mistake happens, one bad trade, one bad play, one bad fight, and your AD carry is never on the same page as you for the rest of the game and basically is like playing like they don't even want to win. You could go in and find like the best engaged, that's the most freest play ever, and they won't lend you a single auto attack. They just are playing to farm, and that's it. And they are no longer playing based off of anything that you do ever whatsoever. Happens all the time, right? What that level of toxicity taught me is that I really need to clean up my laning phase at this level to get past this, because no one will let you win games and rank up if you make any mistakes. I mean, they will, because you can make minor mistakes that even to them aren't that bad or that they don't see. But there is definitely a barrier where you get into like this level of toxicity, where the level of toxicity really does help make you a better player. And if they didn't do that, I don't know. It wouldn't. I do agree that honor level 5 to honor level 0 is drastic. Yeah, we can all agree on that. So I think, to wrap it up, and basically what my conclusion on this would be, is that when we just ask ourselves the basic question, what level of toxicity should be acceptable in a competitive online game? And I think the answer is that the level of acceptable toxicity depends on the rank that you're at, because it depends. You should think about it more like this. We want to ban like the top 1% most toxic players, just like permaban them from the game. Maybe if you're top 2%, you should be occasionally getting like temporary bans if you go too far, or like getting long chat restrictions for like 30 days or something like that. And then there are going to be players who are like, the top 3% or 4% who are like typing every other game in a negative way, like really distracting their team and getting them down. And those players are also going to push it too far, and they should get chat restricted sometimes as well. And all of these players, right, should lose honor. Of course, losing honor doesn't matter if you're permaban, but all of these players should lose honor. And I think that, but the amount of honor that you lose should be lessened as your crime or whatever is less severe. But basically, that's the goal. The goal should be percentage based. Like, we want to deal with and punish the top 5%, or you have to come up with some threshold. This is Riot's job, not mine. You have to come up with some threshold. Maybe we want to punish the top 5% of toxic players, or the top 10% of toxic players, or something like that. The reality, I think, right now is that if we actually think about it, probably, at least in Masters Plus, so I don't know, I don't want to throw out a crazy statistic that you guys are going to say is completely wrong, but I would really have to say that I think, is it reasonable to say that almost everyone has probably gotten chat restricted at least at some point in their time playing League, if they spent, years and years playing League? Like, even just like a 3-game chat restriction or something like that, or whatever it is. I don't even get chat restricted enough to know whether it's a 3-day or a 3-game chat restriction. Maybe there's both. I honestly don't even know. I probably come across as the most toxic player ever for defending this stuff. But the reality is that it really should depend on the rank that you're at, because people's emotions and how invested they are into the game is going to change dramatically at different ranks. So what you actually want to do is you want to ban, let's say it's the top 10% / punish. You want to punish the top 10% of toxic players, right? In silver, that's going to look very different than it is in masters, because the top 10% of most toxic players in silver are going to be one way, right? And using certain language and stuff like that. But then the top 10% of toxic players in masters would be way, way, way more toxic. So what would end up happening if you changed it like that is that because the average master player is probably as toxic as the average silver player, or the, not the average, the, like, your, yeah, like basically your average master player is going to be more toxic than your average silver player. So the punishment for being a little bit more toxic in Masters Plus should be lower. That's my opinion. But maybe it should be higher in more casual ranks. So maybe in Iron, Bronze, and Silver, the punishment should be more severe. And so if the threshold currently is like the top 10% of players are getting punished, maybe the top 15% of players should be getting punished. Maybe the punishment should be a little bit more severe or something. And then for the, for Masters Plus or whatever, you could include Diamond. I'm just saying that because I'm in Masters. But, for higher ELO or whatever, I think that people should be allowed to be progressively a little bit more toxic, because you're, again, they will be progressively more toxic. So you're just targeting the same percentage. So we're just trying to, 10 or 15% most toxic players are getting punished. Well, that means that the guy who's actually only like the 20th percentage most toxic player is not really getting punished at all, even though the 20th percentage toxic player in Masters is way more toxic than that silver player, right? So that's number one, is really, if you were thinking about it in a smart way, it should depend on the rank you're at. Number two, toxicity in League is worse than other competitive environments in games because people are trolling and intentionally trying to lose the game way more than you would ever see in a competitive sport. And so if you want to see less toxicity at all ELOs, but especially in high ELO where people care about the game a lot and get very passionate about the game, you need to prevent the rate at which people are trolling and soft inting games 100%. And then your toxicity level will decrease as a result. So you're killing two birds with one stone. You're getting rid of toxic players and causing people to be less toxic, and changing the reputation of the game, while at the same time dealing with the people who are trolling and inting games and making it a less competitive environment as well. Okay, so then number three, League is not a country club. It is a video game primarily played by young men who are going to be a little bit toxic, and that is fine. That's good. It's the way that they are. It is a space for people to vent, to well, not necessarily a space for people to vent, but like, people do play League as a, like, for a bit of escapism and as like a competitive outlet. And if they're not able to blow off some steam when they're playing a game like League, maybe they'll go to another game where they can. And so that is a risk. It's not a gentleman's game. That's such a ridiculous thing to say. And it never will be. Competitive online games are toxic by nature. They always will be. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's kind of an interesting, unique element to them, right? And then finally, I would say that we can all agree that there need to be more nuanced approaches to people's honor being restricted. So I think somebody who's getting a very light 3-game chat restriction should not be having their honor drop from honor level 5 to honor level 0. As far as I understand it right now, your honor, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but at least in my experience and from what I understand right now, your honor either goes all the way down to 0 or nothing happens to it. I don't think I've ever experienced just going down one honor level, even if that is a possibility. I've never experienced that. It's always been like, even with the lightest chat restriction, you're always back down to honor level 0. I think that that's ridiculous, and I think that it should be more gradual. So if you get, a very light 3-game chat restriction, maybe you go down an honor level, maybe you go down 2 honor levels or something like that, but that's fine. I don't think you should get reset all the way. If you get banned for 2 weeks, of course you should be going down to honor level 0, right? So any actual ban, honor level 0. Maybe if you're getting a 30-day chat restriction, maybe you should be going down to honor level 0 or honor level 1 or something like that, right? But it should just be a gradual scale, not 100 or 0. That's it. One other thing, somebody suggested, which I think is a good idea, that honor be visible to other players. And like I said, I think it would be cool if you could, preemptively mute people by having that information on your teammates. And obviously for ease of use, it would be really nice if you could select, like, I want to, instantly pre-mute the chat from anyone who's below whatever honor level you want to choose. So I only communicate with people who are honor level 5, or I only communicate with people who are honor level 2 or above, or 3 or above, or whatever. But having a little tab like that you could select from would be really nice. Because then this guy who, if they implemented something like that, this guy who's suggesting that's the case wouldn't have to go manually clicking those people every single game. Instead, they'd have just a nice setting to do it. So that would all be nice. So with that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day, and don't be toxic, or maybe be a little bit toxic. But one more thing, actually. The other big thing that I brought up, which I think is really important, is if you're responding to someone to defend yourself because they were toxic first, and frequency. So let's say that you get that chat restriction. Let's start with the other one first. If somebody else is really initiating, the initiator is usually a problem, because it's hard to tell, but there is a big difference between the type of player who constantly initiates arguments in chat and toxicity when no one said anything, and the type of player who only responds to defend themselves from bullying. And I think that someone who's responding even harshly to defend themselves from bullying should not ever be banned for toxicity or be getting chat restrictions and things like that. I think that's ridiculous. But I think that there needs to be some level of detection to tell, okay, these are the type of players that are toxic who are initiating these arguments in chat, and those players should be punished more severely. People who are simply responding and defending themselves when they think that they didn't do something wrong in game, or when they feel like the other person is being overly harsh, or they're just defending themselves from a bully, I think that those people shouldn't be punished as heavily. Now, is the detection on that very difficult? Yeah, probably. Although maybe actually the detection on that one could actually be simple, because maybe it is just whoever types first. Whoever types a flag message first. If multiple people are getting flagged. So maybe if there's multiple people getting flagged in a game, you look for the initiator. But I don't know, maybe it's a little bit difficult. This is one of the reasons why the tribunal was such a good system, is because people could see in the tribunal when they were voting on cases. We should probably talk about the tribunal, actually, and that'll get us to the 2 hours to satisfy that guy's comment. So the tribunal was a system that we had in the beginning of League a long, long time ago, where actually when people were up for bans or major punishments, the community could vote on their case. And it was fun because you got, people being toxic when you're not stuck in the middle of it and it's not affecting your ranked game. It's kind of funny to look at those conversations, right? So it was just funny. It was content, and the community got to essentially moderate itself by judging whether a player deserved to be banned for the way that they were acting and typing in the game. And you had the chat logs from the whole game. And so what you could see is the conversation that happened, and actual human beings would take a look at it and determine, okay, this guy initiated and was being a real dick, and then this guy just told him to fuck off, and this guy was defending himself, and so we don't ban this guy because he was just defending himself. And I'm sure that with the tribunal system, many people who are using what is considered today filtered language or stuff were not getting banned because people recognized that somebody else was being super toxic in their game and then initiated flaming them first. Now all of that nuance is gone from the system, and so that's a huge argument for bringing back the tribunal. But there needs to be some way to detect whether people are just defending themselves from other people who are toxic initiators. And then I think there was one other thing. Oh, the frequency problem. So the other thing is that, let's say that you do something that does warrant a 3-game chat restriction or something like that, but you only do it like once every 6 months. Honestly, I still think you should get the 3-day chat restriction, especially if the honor level thing isn't getting reset to 0 because of it. In the current state, if your honor is getting reset to 0, I genuinely don't think you deserve it, because that's bigger than the 3-game chat restriction, that your honor is getting reset to 0. That's a lot bigger punishment than the 3-game chat restriction. So I think that if the system was designed properly in the first place, where it was just dropping you from honor level 5 to honor level 4, I say go for it. If somebody's being, toxic enough, they're getting chat restricted, even if they're generally not a toxic player, to give them a little bit of a warning and a cooldown type of thing. 3-game chat restriction, honor level down 1 level or something like that, all totally fine. However, in the current system, there needs to be a way to detect, okay, this player is starting toxic conversations every other game but getting around our language filter, and this person is being toxic like in that same sort of way once every 6 months, but they're, not used to being toxic and getting around our language filter, and so they're just using a bunch of swear words, and then they're getting reset. Their honor's getting reset. They're getting chat restricted, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. I think the whole thing's ridiculous. I guess the one other thing we didn't mention was that they've been forcing the toxic players to play normal games to get back into ranked. I don't think that's a good idea either. Like punishing people by actually like wasting their time by making them play normal games and pushing toxic people into normal games, I think is not healthy for the game either. But of course, like I said, really you wouldn't need to punish them by forcing them to play normal games if the people who were really genuinely toxic were just getting severely punished, and the people who weren't that toxic in terms of like being maybe more toxic than the average player, but also being someone who is at a more competitive higher rank, or who does it less frequently, or you're providing that person with a lighter punishment, such as, just knocking down their honor and giving them a light chat restriction instead of forcing them to play normal games or something like that. I think these are all acceptable, good changes. Okay, so finally, with that being said, good luck in solo queue. Have a wonderful day. Don't be toxic, but maybe be a little bit toxic. Okay.